Hi, Brittany. How are you?
Hi, Amy. I'm doing so good. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. I'm so excited for you to be here. So, before we dive in, can you just share a little bit about you and who you are and yeah, what do you do? Who do you help?
Yeah, all the things, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So I'm a certified functional nutrition consultant as well as certified hormone specialist. Within that, I specialize in helping women with their menstrual cycles, particularly in the ages around 20 to 30. But of course, everything that I talk into to help those women can help literally any age. So yeah, it's really exciting to dive into this. And so I don't know if you want me to share a little bit of like my background and what led me into this.
Yeah, please.
Yeah?
Where
Okay.
start?
Yeah, so, whew, how to shorten this story? Because I feel like for us, I cannot be the only one. I feel like we can write multiple books on the stories that have led us into whether that's overall vaginal health or menstrual health or anything like that. Um, but to simplify and shorten that story, essentially for me it kicked off with having horrible periods lasting for like 10 days, and it's heavy bleeds for a solid 10 days. This all started like right in the first year or two of having going into puberty, and I struggled with that for so long, especially in school. Like I literally was falling asleep at my desk because I was so fatigued. I just couldn't function. And later learned that that's a concept of PMS. And so can roll into, of course, before your period and as well into your period. And then, of course, there's other things that tie into it. And of course, was put on birth control at a very young age to stabilize all that. That led into some horrible reactions to birth control, but I just didn't know it was towards birth control. Now, this is my story. That doesn't pertain to everyone. Sometimes birth control can be useful to some.
Mm.
But for me and how my body reacted to it, for so long I had no idea. And I was put on so many different ones, pills to shots to I resulted into an IUD that stopped my period altogether, and I was super happy and loving life. Well, it turned out to create horrible gut complications for me that led into horrible UTIs, to vaginal infections, to even going through yeast infections.
Mhm.
And so all of a sudden, my life has just gone into this haywire reaction. And finally, getting off birth control, stabilizing my gut health, and supporting my menstrual cycle, and learning all of this along the way has really transformed me. I love my period, and I never thought I would ever say that in a million years.
Oh,
Yeah, I have built a beautiful relationship with it, and I'm just totally shocked. I literally would never put if you told me way back when, like, "Brittany, you're gonna be coming into this, and you're gonna be helping women, and you're gonna love your period," I would have been like, "You're nuts." 'Cause who in their right mind loves their period? But it was just the understanding that, like, we don't have to suffer.
mm.
That is not how our body is built. And I think society and the women before us, right, was ever always cultivating of just that's just what you deal with. And
Mm.
that's not true. That is a lie. And so I just really want to advocate for women to find their relief and then enjoy their true self and all that comes with it.
Wow, powerful. Thank you for sharing all that. And honestly, I feel you. We definitely share similar experiences, especially with like the 10 days, the all the different kinds of birth controls, the heavy bleeds.
Mm.
No joke, after I had my daughter, it continued for a while, like the really heavy, hard periods and the PMS and stuff. I was saying I would rather go through childbirth again than experience my period. So, totally feel you, yeah. Oh, it was crazy, and then one time, like, I think it was, like, 21 days, like, it was almost like I bled for the
Oof.
whole cycle, and yeah, I started passing out, fainting.
Wow.
My body was so just exhausted, physically exhausted. My immune system was physically exhausted. I developed chronic bronchitis
Oh,
during that time. Yeah, it
wow.
was, and it's something that like it's been long standing now because
Mhm.
it the my immune system just couldn't handle it. So thank
Wow.
you. Oh my God for sharing all that. And recently,
Yeah.
I'll just share a little bit about me to meet you where you're at. Like falling in love with my period, falling in love with my cycle, like, and the different phases and the roles that they play. It's been a journey for sure. One of the
Yeah.
motivators to get on this call with you and to meet you, and also just following your content because we met like 2 years ago, I think it was.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Wow, time flies.
yeah, it does for sure. It's like, and so you've totally been one of my motivators, but also having a
Mm,
daughter.
yeah.
And like you just coming into my life at that time was so divine and meant to be because I've learned so much from your content. You do put a lot of good stuff out there. And it set those seeds for me to talk to Emmy about different things and coming into the world and being prepared to meet ourselves where we're at. I run my own
Mhm.
business, and one of the things that was holding me back definitely for so long was I can't schedule when I have low energy. And so that
Mhm.
fear kind of, yeah, it was holding me back. So thank you for coming into my life when you did. I'm so
Of
grateful.
course.
Uh,
I love hearing that. So you don't get to see that. Like for whoever's listening, like if you're in the social media standpoint and posting content, like you feel like it's all on you and you feel like you're the only one who cares about it. And so thank you so much for telling me that like, oh, people actually watch this and there's value in it. That's good to hear.
You bet, you bet. Thank you. Just because of like following you along for this long, I've actually even scheduled my moon phases or my menstrual cycles
Love it.
into my calendar. And so there's a reminder when I'm in my luteal phase or when my ovulation phase is coming. I don't actually haven't targeted my ovulation phase yet, but I put my like 2 weeks for my follicular phase. And then, yeah, my
Yeah.
luteal phase, my menstrual cycle, all that. And then understanding what foods and exercises. Trying, anyways. It's a lot, but
Yeah,
here we are.
yeah. Yes, it can be very overwhelming. So yeah, always start with just one particular phase, learn about that, and then move into the next one and next and take it one step at a time. So I think you're doing it beautifully.
Thank you. Thank you. So good. We're so many of us were taught that a period is, yeah, something that you get and you have to, like, you're forced to have it and you're
Mhm.
forced to go through it and it's more of a burden. So, yeah, thank you for the work that you do and bringing it forward. I'm curious, can you break down some of the different like phases and what's actually happening in our bodies?
Yeah, of course. So there are a couple phases into your menstrual cycle. Another important information I like to share sometimes is when we talk into menstrual cycle, it's not all about the period. In fact, the period is actually not the main star of the show. That is your ovulation. Without your ovulation, you can't have a period. So I know, isn't that like wild? When I learned that, I like blew my mind. I was like, it's always the period because
Right.
that's the thing we feel and see, right?
Yeah.
Understandable. But yeah, so you have a couple of different phases that make up your menstrual cycle. So the first phase is called the follicular phase, and it actually is a two-part. So your menstrual cycle or your menses, or sorry, your period and your menses, interchangeable terminology, but essentially that's your first phase of your follicular phase. Sorry, first part of your follicular phase. And
Really?
then, yeah, and then it rolls into the second part, which is after your period, before your ovulation. Then you have your ovulation phase, and then you have your luteal phase, the week, roughly about 2 weeks, roughly before your period begins again. So that's the entire cycle. Some concepts I like to share about it is that in your period phase, is sometimes what I like to call it to simplify things, is where we kind of do naturally roll into low energy as our all our hormones are dropping into a low standpoint. And so it is very common for not to want to go out with the girls, or I like to joke sometimes of where it's like it's just kind of a chore to even get dressed because you're just
Mhm.
like, I just want to be in comfy clothes. You kind of become more like internal and nesting, and
Mhm.
just want to be warm and just creating this like good feeling energy of comfort at this time. If you're not experiencing that, please then reach out to me because I want to support you to feel that way. Um, but yeah, and then you roll into the second part of your follicular phase after your period. And this is when estrogen starts spiking. And actually, interestingly enough, our estrogen at the time, roughly, again, everyone's a little different on what their cycle length is, but roughly around the 3 days into your period, you might find that you're actually very energized. And this is because that's when estrogen starts rising. So a lot of times, a lot of women will come to me of like, I kind of want to go work out and like, but I know I shouldn't during, and it's like, actually, it's okay. Yeah. I think
Okay.
yeah, it's totally okay to go have your like intense workout a couple of days after your first bleed, right? I always like to say honor the first
Mhm.
day or 2 days of just, even though you feel energetic, just really honor the resting. It's kind of like your recharge concept. But yeah, it's totally normal to have the energy within your period, especially around the 3 or 4 day mark. And yeah, you want to go work out. I'm like, go do it. Like, listen to your
Okay.
body. But yeah, that's when estrogen is rising, and that spikes into leading into ovulation. But that's when we start feeling the momentum and energy. And so the second part of our phase, that follicular, is when we definitely are like, yeah, like let's take on things like we're like a whole new person, which I love this phase. I am so much a project, like let's dive into a whole bunch of projects when I'm like, because you get this time of rest, right? You get this time of going internally, and you start finding like you have so many ideas.
Mhm.
And so journaling is a great thing. And then you get to finally roll out of that to where you get to take on those tasks, right? Or at least start building them. And so then you go into your ovulation phase. And this is I love this phase. I get really sassy and so talkative. I love me in this phase. I immediately want to put on something, like, music-wise of just, like, club music or something,
Oh
like,
my
I wanna
God.
dance.
You're talking to me yesterday.
Yeah?
Like, literally.
I know, I'm just like, I wanna move this body. I'm like, I'm so into my ovulation phase, I love it. I just, like, always wanna try to find something sexy to wear, or, like, less is more. Like, I just really wanna just show off my skin. Yeah, I love this phase of me, and I get real sassy. And I love to talk. I will talk anyone's ear off, especially during this phase, and I love it. I'm, like, calling everybody at this time. And so yeah, this is like the time to um take on big things such as like doing like interviews or dating, right? Like this is your big social element. And so taking on those big interactions with sometimes, because it can take a lot of energy to just talk with people, right?
Yeah.
So ovulation is your prime time to do that. So I love that phase. Then rolling into your luteal. So the first week into your luteal after your ovulation happens, you might still have some lingering energy. And so this is a great time to really take advantage of like wrapping up on last minute things, so to speak. But then in your second week of your luteal phase, this is when you're all those. So essentially, something I forgot to mention. So your estrogen rises, right, for your ovulation.
Mhm.
Then progesterone starts rising at that time to come and bring down estrogen. And so they slowly start dropping down together in your luteal phase. And
Mhm.
as it starts declining, you might notice that low energy starting to kick in back over again, right? This is the prime area where you feel PMS, or potentially in circumstances PMDD, right? These are some prime conditions, health conditions that can occur during this particular phase because of the dropping aspect of your hormones and other factors come into play, which we may go into, we may not to. But
Yeah. Can you
um,
just give a quick like example of what PMDD looks like for some women?
yeah, yeah. So one thing I will say is PMDD is not in the sense of an extreme PMS. That's not what really it is. It's its own complication in health. And so with PMDD, aspects can occur in the sense of where it has actually a big connection to your brain health. And this can trigger a lot of extreme mental standpoints into chronic anxiety, depression, even suicidal thoughts. It's no joke. It's very serious. Some other things are aspects of uh, hair growth can occur at this time too. So facial and body loss of hair can be a big trigger for PMDD. I'm trying to think of other serious complications. Um, Insulin resistance becomes a big one during this time. Complete lethargic, like to the point that you don't even want to move your body.
Mm.
That is a big one that can occur at this time too. I'm trying to think of what other symptoms are coming to mind at this
No,
time
that's
being. So
okay.
I
Is there any,
apologize. Yeah.
no worries. What about root cause of PMDD?
Yeah, so some common aspects of cause is really the impacts it does to the brain's reaction to hormonal shifts, particularly the drop of estrogen and what I was mentioning before in the luteal phase, right? And progesterone. But hormone sensitivity becomes a big concept in the sense that our brain gets overly sensitive to progesterone's fluctuation as well as serotonin levels. So, if the estrogen and why it's such an important hormone is it actually helps regulate your serotonin.
Okay.
And if the
Interesting.
yeah, so if within that drop of that luteal phase, that then also can play a huge role to serotonin plummeting, and of course leading into those feelings of depression, anxiety, and irritability,
Mm.
inflammation and stress. So things that are like chronic stress concepts, right? So managing stress is a big one. Another one that comes to mind is like poor gut health. So that is a big one. Inflammation can be another trigger, as well as blood sugar. Um, if insulin resistance, right, is occurring. So essentially, with insulin, it's really just comes down to your blood sugar levels. And if there is a high spike and a periodically high spike, that of course can throw off a lot of healthy functions within the body, which leads into energy crashes, mood swings, cravings, and it just amplifies those PMDD symptoms.
Okay. Oh, thank you for
Yeah,
sharing that with
yeah,
me and with our listeners because it's super huge. And something that really stood out, I want to underline is PMDD is not the same as like extreme PMS. And
correct. It's not.
that was so good because I think a lot of women, especially with social media, as beautiful as it is, we often self-diagnose just based on certain information and like,
Right?
no shame, no judgment. It is
I'm
what it
gonna turn
is.
the light on. Sorry. I
Yeah, no,
realized all of a sudden natural light decided to quit on me. So,
no worries at all. Thank you. But yeah, so self-diagnosing, especially when there's overlapping symptoms, similar symptoms,
yeah, yeah,
say extreme PMS, and we experience, yeah, the similar symptoms. So thank you. That was really important. The serotonin sensitivity, the gut health, like
yeah,
it's so nice to hear how connected all of our systems are and how they work together. So yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Beautiful. Okay, so you were talking about the luteal phase and the dip.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, so, um, within that dip, If you are experiencing anything of those symptoms that I was mentioning, whether that's PMS or PMDD, here's another thing I want to share. PMDD is not too well known, right? We all like associate PMS with periods, right? And we also are like, oh, I'm PMSing kind of concepts, right? That we always default to. And here's something I just really want to emphasize: PMS is not normal. It is not something we should normalize. And so, with these symptoms
Mhm.
of feeling fatigued or breast tenderness or bloating or those mood swings or irritability or pain during our periods, these are all things that are not something that we should be dealing with. And I feel that society has normalized it, right?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
that's just a big thing that I want to share into that, and why I really focus a lot into the luteal phase, just supporting women on supporting that. And a tip I will share and really quickly is, each phase affects the next. So how you treat your body in one phase can have a replication or an impact to the
Mhm.
next. And so, yeah, so with that said, yeah, that's where luteal phase is something we definitely want to be monitoring and watching, and how our body responds, especially leading into our period, and especially if it's lingering into the time of our period cycle. But ideally, what you should be feeling in this phase is a sense of calm and a
Okay.
sense of relaxation, and kind of that prepping into that nesting that I was talking about in the period standpoint, right? It's like things start slowing down, and you start realizing you're like, okay, I'm gonna spend a less time with people and a less and more time with me, kind of thing, and that's okay. I think we need to give ourselves respectful boundaries, and putting that in place. And you don't have to necessarily say like, "Hey, I'm in my little phase, go away," but you can if you want to.
Yeah, I've been
um,
saying that.
yeah, right.
I need to die.
Um, yes, exactly. But yeah, this is the time where you get to really just enjoy your time. Bringing back all the focus that you've done for everyone else to really take it in for you and focus and kind of turn that mirror, right? I think what gets missed is we always want to be in service of others. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of. But it's important to remember to take time to do that for ourselves, so that re energizes and fills our cup, so that way we can be there to serve others, right? And so that's where I think luteal phase gets a bad rep because of all these symptoms, right? But really, it's a beautiful part of our phase that should be really honored.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That was wow, you delivered some powerful breakthroughs and some for myself. I feel like the more I've been tuning in to the different roles and like trying to navigate and watch my energy levels and stuff, tracking my cycle, or I like to call it my moon time, or when I'm bleeding,
Mm,
I have my period, that's my moon time. My moon cycle is, well, the whole thing, right? So that's what
yeah.
I relate it to. And so when I'm in that luteal phase, I've really we're okay. So many of us experience the moodiness, the intense, like, yeah, mood swings, the pain, the exhaustion, even the depression.
Mm,
Um, so it has been normalized. So in tuning into it, I noticed it subsiding a little bit. So knowledge is power. We know that.
mhm,
Like that's philosophically proven for so many thousands of years, right?
correct.
Um, the one thing though is still my thoughts, like that hormonal shift. And so yeah, the powerful insights of like the brain health, how it gets affected during these times, and the when the estrogen dips, the progesterone brings it down, serotonin levels, like holy, just knowing what I know about brain health and how our energy, emotions affect the thoughts that we think. Wow,
Mhm.
wow, wow. The hormones play such a big role.
They really do. It's
Boy.
wild. Yeah. So cool though.
Yeah, and it is so cool. Thank you for sharing all this and sharing that a good place for people to start is stress management, tuning into their different cycles, focusing on one phase is a really good place to start. Um, Something else you talk about is PCOS and other hormonal imbalances. There's a lot of misinformation, especially around hormones out there. So can
Yes.
you shed a little bit of light on PCOS and what's happening?
Yeah, so PCOS, it is a hormonal disorder that affects your ovulation and metabolism and insulin functions. And so with that, this is and it breaks my heart because it's not something we should be having to go through, but it is actually become the most common disorder in women, almost impacting like 1 out of 10 women worldwide, which is blows my mind, right?
1 out
Um,
of 10, did you say?
yeah,
Holy wow, wow.
yeah, right. Um, and so with that, some symptoms that can be associated with PCOS is like irregular or missed periods, uh, uh, excess estrogen. So essentially, symptoms like uh, acne, whether that's on the face or the back or any other part of the body, right? Hair loss of
Good
your
to know.
actual hair on your head or excess hair growth of facial or body, insulin resistance. So essentially, I say that a lot, but again, it's just blood sugar in fluctuations, right? So essentially, it can almost potentially lead into diabetes, right?
Mhm.
That's serious
Well,
condition.
sounds like
Um,
that it could also trigger, like, pre-diabetes markers, like, if people are getting blood work.
Potentially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And then it can play a role into our sugar cravings, obviously, when our blood sugar levels are in balance, right? And we're always constantly feeling like we need that sweet something. That could be some clue ins at times, especially if it's an overwhelming urge and always wanting it. Difficulty losing weight, particularly, is a factor. So, a lot of gaining weight, but again, it's not a hard and fast rule with that. Some women will find that they actually lose weight out of nowhere, kind of concept, and not in a healthy way. And then it can lead into potentially cysts, growth on the ovaries, fatigue, and extensive mood swings, increased anxiety and depression. Again, right? Like a lot of mood connection, because a lot of our hormone production starts in our brain, and so
Mm,
that's where a lot of that emotional standpoint comes in.
wow, wow. Thank you, and curious, I don't know where this is coming from, maybe one of the listeners is struggling with it, but I feel
Mhm.
called to ask, what is the connection between, like, PCOS and endometriosis or even, like, BM PMDD or, like, intense PMS?
Yeah.
Is there any connections there?
So here's the biggest thing in all symptoms hormonally, right? As well as vaginal health. There's kind of a hormonal hierarchy.
Okay.
So the big ones is cortisol and insulin. Those are kind of the drivers that lead into kind of the downward impact, so to speak. And so the interesting thing that I found in like all the books I've read and all the learnings that I've done to get through my certifications and stuff is like it constantly comes up with insulin and cortisol, like never fails. And
Right.
so what's fascinating about that and what I specialize in my particular coaching for women is that foundational piece of really building in the lifestyle aspect of habits that focus around these concepts, right? And so, what they all have in common, kind of to answer your question, and how they all play a role is if there's aspects of in fluctuations or resistance or implications to your insulin, therefore, your blood sugar level can play a role, as well as implications into stress, that cortisol. And so, um, Yeah, so yes, there's very much a connection between all of them. They all represent their own, like what they do to the body, right? But how they all can start forming and creating complications all comes back to those roots.
Okay, powerful. Oof. That went way deep for me, like, even down to my inner child, like, my childhood, the things that I
Mm,
went through, um, when you especially mentioning, like, cortisol and insulin, which, as we know, is blood sugar. So,
yeah.
I'm thinking, like, hypothetically speaking, somebody like me going through, really stressful young years, 0 to 7 or even 0 to 14, 12, 14, we start
Mm,
getting our periods. Well, then so stressful, 0 to 14. Our bodies, even at those ages, are already pumping insulin. And what do we
mhm.
do to or sorry, cortisol.
Yes,
And then
you're right.
yeah,
Yeah.
pumping cortisol, and then what do we do to kids? Well, we fill them with sugar. Sugar
Mm,
this, sugar that, blah, 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 blah. So we're spiking their blood sugars during these ages. And then they go to high school and they're starting their cycle, and then they have all this peer pressure, more stress, more cortisol. Parents aren't monitoring them, like, so they're
mm,
having all these blood sugar spikes. And then
mm,
they're in their young 20s and they're struggling with chronic PMS or like intense PMS, or it's leading into this PMDD, or
mm.
then they're having these irregular periods and starting to show symptoms of PCOS. I can see it, all these different connections of how society is living their life and how it can actually be a driving point of like the cortisol spikes, the stress spikes, the
Yeah.
spikes. Um, wow, thank you so much. So, like, huge
Yeah.
benefit of understanding your cycle, taking the time to
Mhm.
understand your hormones, and not just for women. I feel like for men too. Well, of course, we're talking about women right now, but can see I do have some male listeners. I'm not sure if they'll listen to this or not, but you
I
know,
think may I real quick? So
yeah.
for the male listeners, keep in mind, even though you don't have a menstrual cycle, you still have a fluctuating hormone. It's just every 24 hours versus every 28 days. Granted, the 28-day rule, it doesn't apply to every single woman. So keep in mind, I like to say it's roughly around like 27 to 32, roughly, of a cycle. But with that said, um, taking into blood sugar balance and reducing stress can also support males in this. And I will also say, understanding that woman has different phases of her cycles and what her changes are can actually support your relationship with that person, regardless if it's your mom, your daughter, or your wife, or so forth, right? So I think I hope you do listen because I think it would be beneficial either way, whether it's individual or to the important women in your life.
Oh, you nailed that. Thank you. Yes, and I do know I have even like single dads on here that listen with are fathers of daughters. So I
Mm.
really thank you for underlining that. Okay, Brittany, before we completely wrap up here, what are some nuggets or takeaways that people can like start using at home right now? Yeah. What are some of those?
Yeah, yeah, no, I love this question. Okay, so here's something I will share really quickly. What I'm about to talk into is very high level, but it's a great kickstart in the right direction. As of course, everyone's individual, right? And so when I speak into nutrition, which is the big piece that I'm going to talk into next, do know that, of course, that's what I specialize in helping to get really narrowed in on what works for that person. But like I said, there's some great insights into this next piece that can be really helpful. And so, the biggest one, which I feel a lot of us default to, is skipping breakfast, right? I'm so guilty of this. I just wake up and I just want to get my day started, and sometimes there's just no time for breakfast, or I'm just not all like that hungry, right? Here's a big thing about that. This comes back to the blood sugar balance that I was referring to, right? That insulin concept. So the breakfast actually really helps set up our blood sugar throughout the entire day. So it's so crucial to have a breakfast. Now, with that said, for every meal, to really help support your balance, and this is where it gets to be simple and easy to apply, is you really want to focus on macronutrients. This is your protein, your healthy fats, your um, carbs, essentially veggies, as well as your fiber. So within that, really want to focus on making sure each meal consumes all of those. So at times, I know we love to default to like the breads. I'm guilty of that. Love a good bread. But here's where that causes conflicts, right? So just having carbs alone can cause blood sugar spike. So you really want to make sure that you're bringing back those proteins, those healthy fats within that, as well as fiber. Fiber is a big one that I feel that does also get missed a lot. And keep in mind, our fruits and our vegetables, our whole foods, do contain fiber in them. And that's what is so powerful about them, and why it's so important to make sure you have those in your meals, is because it stabilizes that blood sugar.
Mhm.
And so, another thing I want to mention on is that when it comes to managing stress, so again, as I mentioned with the hierarchy of like blood sugar and cortisol, right? So, managing stress. So, when it comes to managing stress, stress is not the evil guy. I want to just or necessarily just evil. It's not. Stress is actually what gets you up in the morning. It actually gets you what to do your day to day. So it's actually an important hormone. Cortisol is. But the conflict that we arise in today's world is cortisol tends to stay high and progresses. And that is what causes a lot of conflicts within the body. Because, so, a fun little fact, when cortisol rises, estrogen drops.
Mhm.
And that is our key hormone, especially for us women, that operates a lot of health functions for our entire body, not just our menstrual cycle. And of course, a lot of things. Our digestion shuts down when we're in high cortisol levels. Literally, like from the chest down, everything just shuts down because everything is focused on blood flow and muscle and everything like that. That's really in the sense of stress response. So, with that said, we really want to find key things that can help us manage, whether that's yoga, meditation, journaling, breath work. A tip that I like to share with my clients is breath work. In particular, it's the box breath, because you can do it with your eyes open. You can do it as you're driving. You can do it at work. You can do it in the bathroom. Like, you can do it literally anywhere for just under 2 minutes. And that's just such easy assets to like plug in, right? As you're going by your day to day, whether you're a busy mom, right? And so with that, the box breath, there's different versions of it. The one I particularly like is you exhale first for a count of 5, and then you inhale slowly for a count of 7. And then you hold that breath for a count of 5, and then you slowly exhale for a count of 7. So that is the concept of the box breath. And you do this again, just under 2 minutes, but you can do it up to 5 times to 10 times. This, what it does is it relaxes your nervous system and puts you in this calming, relaxing state, which actually helps lower cortisol.
Yes. I love it. And like powerful, powerful nugget right there. 2 minutes. 2
Right?
minutes.
Yeah, like, it's so easy, and then it just doesn't require to have all the quietness, right? And, no distraction. You
Yeah.
can literally do it with your eyes open, so
Like go to the bathroom.
yeah,
Like if
like,
or
if you're at work and you're like, "I need a timeout," or, like, "I need a moment. I'm just gonna go in the the
go into the bathroom
restroom."
because like how many of us are in the bathroom for more than 2 minutes? Like when we're doing our duties. Like, oh my God, that's such a little nugget of time that
Yeah.
is so transformative in our entire system. Thank you. Carry on. Sorry.
Oh, no. You're fine, you're fine. I love it. Those were just the big ones that I wanted to share really quickly as quick
Okay.
takeaways that you can be applying right now.
Awesome. Thank you, Brittany, for sharing those. So macronutrients, breaking that fast, tuning into proteins, fats, vegetable carbs, and
Yeah.
fiber. Um, curious, so many of us like we're raised on porridge and cereals and like
Mm,
toast in the morning. And even when you go out to like breakfast buffets, like that's such a staple there.
yeah.
Can you share a little bit about like how something like oatmeal, what's deemed as healthy, can spike that?
Yeah, so essentially high carbs is what can potentially lead into spikes of blood sugar levels, especially in the sense of carbs alone, right? And so it just really comes back to remembering to um and it doesn't have to be this big or meal, but it can be like, okay, what little things can I add to this porridge or oatmeal, right? So whether that a couple of crushed up seeds or nuts, so to add in your fiber and your fat, maybe even including chia seeds, right? Those contain protein
And fiber.
as well as, of course, fiber and healthy fat as too. So there's little aspects of certain things like that. Maybe like even cut up a little bit of bacon and mix it in, or um, trying to think of another breakfast sausage. Cutting up a little sausage and putting to help with the protein piece within the realms of adding healthy fats. Um, there's even concepts that there's so many different versions of oatmeals. I was actually really surprised. I researched this one day of like there's savory, there's sweet, there's like a whole bunch of. So some people are actually putting a cracked egg um, uh, uh, a sunny side up, I think it was, on
Yeah.
an oatmeal, and I was like, "That's actually genius to
What
add
an
in the
idea.
protein with it." Yeah, I was like, "That's a great idea."
Okay.
So yeah, so you can get really creative with adding in those staples, right? Those things that are, and that's the thing that I love to work on is like I'm not trying to remove anything; I'm trying to add in what is going to really help support your balance. So it's not something that you have to get really limited on, right? And of course, I think there's a big emotional connection with food, right? It's a staple since like childhood of this particular food that we know maybe not be super healthy, but doesn't mean you have to completely remove it. It just means what else can we add into it that can support your hormones, your overall health, and of course your blood sugar levels.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And cortisol is not a bad thing, especially as it's becoming a trendy buzzword. So thank you for
Correct.
sharing all that. Um, Beautiful addition.
Good, good. I'm glad.
This is beautiful. It's been such a powerful conversation. I'd like to wrap up. I don't want to take too much of your time, but
No
please,
worries.
if somebody's struggling with any of this stuff and or resonating with any of it and wants to dive deeper with you, Brittany, how can they connect with you? Where can they connect with you?
Yeah.
And how do you support them?
Yes, love this question. Okay, so you can follow me through my content, much like Amy was doing through Instagram. It's my handle is the dot Brittany. That's two T's ANY dot Anderson. And through there, you can get a lot of these answered questions that even Amy was asking and get more in depth into it from the content I share, or feel free to reach out DM wise, and I'm happy to bring you into my world. But essentially, what I do to support the hormonal fluctuations and overall menstrual health is comes down to the foundational work, nutrition and stress management, movement, as well as mindset. I think these are some crucial pieces that, regardless if like you can do all the testing, you can work with all the fancy doctors, but they're all going to come back to these foundational pieces. And so I help build the habit and the routine of understanding these and how to incorporate them into your life because everyone's life is so different and what impacts them and what comes their way, and as well as the individuality of what resonates for your body and what works and what doesn't. So we get a really personalized touch, so to speak, to cultivate and plug in and really tune into your body.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I just love that you bring your functional nutrition into this because it's powerful and
Yes.
nutrition is just nutrition, but we really have to make it functional. We
Yes.
really do. And so yeah, it's so important. I admire you. I admire your knowledge and your wisdom and everything
Mhm.
that you've shared
You're
today.
amazing.
Thank you so much. Yeah,
My
with helping
pleasure.
balance our emotions and understand our cycles so much and making self-care work for you. This young generation, we talk about so many of us experiencing the negative aspects of PMS,
Mm,
but we also, so many of us didn't get the chance to learn this. We weren't taught this from our previous generation, and the previous generations weren't taught it either. It's just like you bleed, you're a woman, slap on something, and away you go. Like, it
yeah.
was so I don't know if this is TMI for some people. My mom didn't even teach me how to use a tampon. Like, come on. Or,
Yeah.
like for the parents out there, let's really give our kids all that they can or all that they need in order for them to succeed in this life. So
Agreed.
thank you, Brittany, for helping. And I will tag you in the notes or in the episode description here so that people can easy get a hold of you, follow your page.
Yeah.
And if anybody also, yeah, DM her. If anybody has any questions, DM me. And thank you so much for listening, joining us. And thank you, Brittany. Yeah, again.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so grateful for what you're doing as well. This is so powerful and you're helping so many people.
Thank you. Thank you.